Good afternoon, fifth graders. I'm Renee Phillips, Director of Communication for Mobile County Public Schools. I am not Miss Hicks. She couldn't be here, but she had prepared a great lesson for you today, and so I want to deliver it to you because this will be your last fifth grade lesson because you're about to become a sixth grader, and I know you're very excited about that. I have a fifth grader at home, and he's looking forward to middle school, and I know you are too. So Mrs. Hicks prepared this lesson, and she wanted to remind you that we here at MCPSS TV are giving away some prizes. So she has a question written here. I'm going to ask it, and if you have the answer to it, can you please email us at mcpsstv@mcpss.com. If you forget that email address, you can look at our Facebook page, and it's written there. We have some Chick-fil-A gift cards, and we have some t-shirts that we love to give to you. We can only give away one to the first person who gets the answer correct. So you'll see that question, so please pay attention. She wanted me to remind you about the race strategy when you're reading your book. So remember, when you get a question that you need to answer, you need to RACE. That means R is restate the question, A is answer the question, and then the C and E are cite evidence to support your answer. So listen to the story and infer what is the gift that Matthew has for his teacher. Provide text evidence to prove your answer, and then email your answer to mcpsstv@mcpss.com. So I'm going to read you three of Ms. Hicks' favorite books that she wanted to close out the year with. The first one is The Last Day of School. It is by Lewis Borden, and it's illustrated by Adam Gustafson. During the last week of May, the big countdown began. There were only 10 days left at the Albert E. Chapman Elementary School calendar. They were 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Finally, June 4th. It was the last day of school for the Chapman students and staff, including Mrs. Mallory's third graders. Thank you, terrific students. What an A+ year. That morning, Mrs. Mallory wrote her last daily message of the year, neatly in chalk on the blackboard in room 6, just as the line of yellow buses rumbled up the school driveway at 8:20 a.m. and began to unload the students one by one. Room 6 had tall windows that let in the sunlight, shiny wooden floors that creaked, a cage with a hamster named Rhoda, and 23 desks for the students whom Mrs. Mallory had taught all year. It was a classroom full of books by Mrs. Mallory's favorite authors and other important things that third graders use, like graphs and maps and computers and folders and more folders. On the wall above the teacher's desk was a round-faced clock with 2 black hands that scratched the minutes by, tick, tick, and never seemed to keep the right time. I love teaching these students. We learn from each other, so we're double trouble in here, Mrs. Mallory always joked each September on Parent Information Night. But like every year, this one had somehow zoomed by. Papers and projects had been taken home, and books and school supplies had been put away during the countdown days and were stacked neatly on Mrs. Mallory's shelves for the coming summer months. Now, on this morning of June 4th, 519 Chapman students, from wiggly kindergartners to cool fifth graders, crowded through the front doors and hurried down the hallways to their classrooms for the very last time this school year. Everyone was talking in extra loud voices about the special picnic at lunchtime, fifth graders only, about the giant lollipops that Mrs. Graff, the school secretary, was handing out to the kids who had perfect attendance, about the longer recess scheduled for all grades, about the snazzy, jazzy music that Mr. Frazier, the principal, was playing over the PA system, and about the farewell gifts some of the students had in their backpacks to give to their teachers. Matthew Perez listened to the Chapman students he passed in the hallways on his way to room 6. He peeked in his backpack to check the package tied with ribbon, and then smiled to himself as he walked into his classroom on his last day as a third grader. Mrs. Mallory was going to love his goodbye gift. Matt loves sports, and he was as quick as lightning in the football game during recess. When the principal joined in and played quarterback, Matt was a whiz at catching Mr. Frazier's passes, dodging his classmates and running with the ball for a touchdown. Matt was also good at numbers and time. Every day he wore a blue Chicago Cubs wristwatch to school. Matt always knew the correct time, down to the exact minute and second. For the past year, Mrs. Mallory had assigned Matt a special job of his own, official timekeeper of room 6. Several times during the school day, Matt quietly checked his Cubs watch and then stepped up into Mrs. Mallory's desk chair and stood on his tiptoes to reset the hands on the classroom clock to the correct time. Matt knew to the minute when recess was about to begin. He knew when it was time for his class to go to gym and music and library and art, and he knew when the lunch bell was about to buzz loudly throughout Chapman Elementary School. During the countdown days, Mrs. Mallory and her class had attended to important final details before the end of the school year. Overdue library books were found and returned. Desks were cleaned out and scrubbed. Students rummaged through the lost and found. On each busy day, the minutes ticked by on the wall clock, which Matt carefully monitored with his Cubs watch. More than once, Mrs. Mallory walked past Matt's desk, shook her head, and sighed. How will my class ever stay on schedule next year without our terrific timekeeper? Near the teacher's overflowing desk, a to-do list was pinned on the wall and checked off, task by task. Plants were given away, posters were rolled up. Then Mrs. Mallory held a special Vacation Home for Rhoda raffle because everyone had offered to keep the popular hamster over the summer. Now, on the morning of June 5th, Mrs. Mallory stood in the doorway of room 6 and greeted her students. She waved to a group of second graders who were headed down the hall to their classroom. Some of them hoped she would be their teacher next fall, but they wouldn't know until they opened their report cards, signed by Mr. Frazier, at the end of the day. Today, Mrs. Mallory would be saying goodbye to each of her third graders. Next fall, they would be moving on to 4th grade and to other Chapman teachers. She would miss these kids. After a wonderful year as their teacher, Mrs. Mallory knew her students like a mother hen knows her chicks. June 4th at Chapman Elementary School was indeed a day to remember. Some classes wrote funny last day poems. The first graders made last day hats and wore them in a spur-of-the-moment parade. The departing 5th graders gave Mr. Fields, the custodian, a special key ring with his name on it. The art teacher brought in paintbrush cookies for her last day classes. Mrs. Bell, the gym teacher, wore a t-shirt that said summer. The school cooks put on chef hats and sang to students in the cafeteria line. And the second graders made awesome year badges for the bus drivers. The last day was an ending and a beginning all mixed up together. A day when most of the Chapman teachers looked a bit frazzled from the busy weeks in May. Mr. Frazier emailed hastily to the staff, "We're almost to the finish line." In room 6, everyone swapped lists of favorite books for summer reading. Then students began to whisper among themselves, and slowly, shyly, one by one, they presented Mrs. Mallory with her goodbye cards and presents. Matt stood at the edge of the group crowded around his teacher's desk. He craned his neck for a better look and watched Mrs. Mallory open a bar of pink soap from Sarah Dryden, then a box of chocolates from James Romano, then a book from Meredith Alvarez, then a #1 teacher mug from his best friend AJ, then a long feather pen from Nikki Gregg. No one had brought anything like Matt's goodbye present, which was still in his book bag. Mrs. Mallory dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief when she read through the thank you cards and notes. She sniffled again when she snapped a photo of each of her third graders. Matt slicked his hair back and smiled broadly when she took his picture. He'd loved his year in Mrs. Mallory's class. Then he remembered it was his last day as a third grader. Next year, he wouldn't be in room 6. He'd have a new group of classmates, all 4th graders. He'd be in a classroom far down the hall and up the stairs, on the 2nd floor of Chapman Elementary School. Cool. Would his 4th grade teacher be Mrs. Quinn, or Mrs. Bulgari, or Mrs. Burnett? Time was running out. Still, Matt wanted to wait and hand his teacher her gift at the very end of the day. Nobody else seemed to notice that the day was a day to remember. The whole school was too busy saying goodbyes or having fun or celebrating or asking how next year could ever match the one that had just gone by. Then, just as everyone in room 6 was about to explode with last day excitement, the 2 room mothers arrived with a big tray of ice cream bars and announced that Mr. Frazier had given permission for a kickball game on the playground. Mrs. Mallory's class lined up and headed outdoors. Matt cheered for his winning team, and he rounded the bases with his usual lightning speed. Of course, that day Matt had still done his job and made sure that Mrs. Mallory's clock was keeping the right time. Suddenly, it was 2:20 p.m. The 2:30 early dismissal bell would be buzzing soon. Everyone checked inside their clean desks for anything left behind and zipped up their backpacks. The countdown began again, but now students were counting minutes instead of days. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Matt pulled the wrapped gift from his backpack and looked around the room for Mrs. Mallory. He'd surprise her right after the bell rang. Time to get ready. Time to go to your bus group. I'll be thinking about you all summer, and here's a goodbye hug for you, and for you, and for you. Matt heard his teacher's warm, familiar voice above the final stacking of chairs upon desks in room 6. Then, bzzz. Throughout the Chapman classrooms and hallways, students and teachers clapped and cheered. Yes! School was out. No more homework. No more lunches. No more tests. Tomorrow, kids could sleep late. Mrs. Mallory's class joined in the pandemonium. Lines of students dashed out of the school to their buses. Remember, no running in the halls. The entire building echoed with voices. Everyone was calling to friends, "Goodbye, goodbye, see you next fall, happy summer." Matt turned round and round, scanning the classroom. Where was his teacher? Puzzled, he waited by her desk as the rest of the class hurried out the door. "Hey, where's Miss Mallory?" he asked. "Bus duty," Nikki yelled back. Matt raced out of room 6, dodging a slow line of kindergartners. He ran down the crowded hall with his present and his backpack. Over the PA system, Mr. Frazier's calm voice was announcing the bus dismissal. "Bus 9 and bus 14 are loading now. Last call. Bus 5, walk to the right, please. Have a great summer, everyone." Bus 5 was Matt's bus. Matt looked to the left, then he looked to the right. Everywhere, dozens of students were in motion. Where was Mrs. Mallory? He had to say goodbye. He had to say thank you. He couldn't get on his bus, not yet. The seconds were ticking by. Matt stood outside the school building in the warm sunshine, holding his present under his arm. He didn't even care that the red ribbon bow was crushed as flat as a pancake. He saw Mrs. Bell in her summer t-shirt. He saw Miss Knox, the music teacher, talking to a parent. He saw Mr. Fields directing bus traffic. Where was Mrs. Mallory? Matt blinked and felt a small flutter of missing a good friend panic. He heard the engines of the remaining buses revving up and saw students' faces at every window. He heard AJ calling to him from their favorite seat, telling Matt to hurry up. Matt grabbed the present tightly and sprinted toward bus 5. And then there was Mrs. Mallory, standing on the steps of his bus, wildly waving her arms at him. "Matthew Perez, oh Matt, I've been looking for you. I didn't get to say goodbye in the room because I had to rush off to bus duty. I couldn't remember your bus number, and I looked and looked on some of the other buses. Then I finally remembered it was bus 5, but you weren't on it." Mrs. Mallory leaned down and gave Matt a mother hen hug. "I wanted you to know how much I'm going to miss you next year." Matt sighed with relief. "I've been looking for you too, Mrs. Mallory. I wanted to say goodbye too." He handed the box to his teacher. "Here's your present. I wanted to give it to you the minute the dismissal bell rang. I wrapped it in blue paper for the Cubs. It's smaller, but it keeps the right time." And there, with everyone on bus 5 watching from their windows, Mrs. Mallory opened the farewell gift from her official timekeeper. Overhead, a long stream of white cloud moved slowly across the June sky. Matt's teacher laughed out loud and dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief at the very same time. And when Mrs. Mallory hugged him again, she told Matthew Perez it was the best last day of school that she could ever remember. The end. And wasn't that a good story? It's like our last day of school that we usually have, not this year, but I know that you have some of those same experiences on your last day of school. Now, a reminder, here's the question she asked. What was the gift that Matthew gave his teacher? Please provide text evidence to prove your answer and email your answer to mcpsstv@mcpss.com. Remember to follow the RACE strategy. Restate the question, answer the question, and cite evidence. Now, she has a couple more stories to read. This one is called Remarkably You. It is written by New York Times bestselling author Pat Miller and illustrated by Patrice Barton. You might be bold, you might be loud, leading parades, drawing a crowd. You might be timid, you might be shy, quietly watching your neighbors go by. You might be big, practically grown, coming and going with friends of your own. No matter your volume, your age, or your size, you have the power to be a surprise. You have the know-how, you're savvy and smart. You could change the world. Are you willing to start? Don't sit on the sidelines, be part of the fray. Go after your passions a little each day. Find what needs fixing, repair what you can. Then choose a new problem and do it again. Perhaps you're uncertain, not sure what to do. Just look for the moments that let you be you. Like maybe you're funny or bookish or fast, or maybe you're always decidedly last. Perhaps you like counting or drawing or finding invisible dragons to slay. You have your own spirit, unparalleled flair, so rock what you've got every day, everywhere. Perhaps you wander or wonder or sing. The world needs your voice and the gifts that you bring. You can make a difference in big ways or small. You won't know how much till you give it your all. So find what you're good at, what you have to give, then go share your sunshine wherever you live. You might be a helper who's first on the scene, a speller, a builder, a rope-jumping queen, a swimmer who knits, a cellist who cheers, a mutt-loving cat cuddler who volunteers. You're a blessing, a promise, a prize. You're capable, caring, courageous, and wise. You might go unnoticed or shine like a star, but wherever you go and whoever you are, don't change how you act to be just like the rest. Believe in yourself and the things you do best. So whether you're daring or careful or kind, embrace who you are and the way you're designed. Dream your own dreams, hear your own heart. You could change the world, you just have to start. Follow your path. Do what you love to do. Be completely, uniquely, remarkably you. That was great. So believe in yourself and be you. That's such a great message. Now our final story is The Last Day Blues by Julie Dannenberg, illustrated by Judy Love. On the Monday morning before the Friday that was the last day of school, Mrs. Hartwell took attendance. She sighed as she called out the last name. I'm going to miss all of you, she said. The kids nodded in agreement. I'm going to miss my friends, said Shannon. I'm going to miss Daisy, said Dan. I'm going to miss chocolate milk and pizza for lunch, said Joe. Everyone felt a little blue thinking about the last day of school, even Daisy. That afternoon during recess, the students talked as they hung out on the jungle gym. Mrs. Hartwell said she's going to miss us, said Alexandra, swinging from a bar. We should get a present to cheer her up, said Eddie, hanging upside down by his knees. But what could they get her? I could give her the rest of my sandwich. It's my mom's bologna special, said Josh. Or a coffee cup, or a new pen, the kind with feathers and beads. The students thought and thought, but couldn't come up with one single idea that they all agreed on. We'll think of something tomorrow, Eddie assured everyone as they lined up at the drinking fountain. On the Tuesday before the Friday that was the last day of school, Mrs. Hartwell read the final page of her last read-aloud book. I'm going to miss circle time, said Mrs. Hartwell. I'm going to miss science, said Emily. I'm going to miss seeing Miss Hartwell wear her safety goggles during science, said Jack, giggling. And so before they got too sad, Mrs. Hartwell put on her safety goggles one last time just for fun. We definitely need to cheer Mrs. Hartwell up, said Andy during recess as he jumped out of a swing. Any ideas about a present? Eddie asked. Nope, they all answered back. On the Wednesday before the Friday that was the last day of school, Mrs. Hartwell brought in her super duper sugar cookies with extra frosting. "I'm going to miss snack time, but I can't wait for barbecues by the pool," said Jack. "I'm going to miss recess, but I can't wait to play hide and seek outside after dinner," said Alexandra. "I'll miss school, but I can't wait for summer vacation," said Josh. The class discussed their summer plans and drowned their last day blues with another round of milk and sugar cookies. "I don't know whether to be happy or sad today," Andy said the minute they all arrived at the jungle gym. "Mrs. Hartwell is sad," said Olivia. "She probably doesn't want the year to end." "While we're swimming, she'll be reading her old lesson plan," said Walker. "And while we're playing, she'll be trying to remember the fun times we had this year," said Dan. And that's when an idea zip-zapped and zinged through Eddie's brain. "I know exactly what will cheer her up," Eddie said, jumping down from the jungle gym. The class agreed it was perfect. On the Thursday before the Friday that was the last day of school, Eddie raised his right hand after Mrs. Hartwell started language arts. "We need some privacy, please," he said. And so Mrs. Hartwell took down bulletin boards with her back to the class. She never even peeked. Well, only once. On the morning of the Friday that was the last day of school, the students dashed into the classroom. They snapped open the shades for the very last time. They did their chores for the very last time. They fed Daisy for the very last time. And as soon as the bell rang, they couldn't wait for Mrs. Hartwell to see her present for the very first time. The last day of school makes us so blue. We'll miss recess and pizza and reading too. We'll miss Daisy and cookies and friendships true, snack time and science and learning new. We'll miss spelling bees for our test review and groundhogs that play peekaboo. This year's been great, a big wahoo! There are many things to miss, it's true, but mostly what we'll miss is you." Later on during recess, Eddie said, "I think Mrs. Hartwell liked her present. I just hope it helps." Margaret said, "Poor Mrs. Hartwell," they all said sadly as they pictured their final goodbye. "Teachers must hate the last day of school." And then it was time. The bell rang. "Goodbye," the students called as they rushed out the door. "Goodbye," Miss Hartwell called after them. And then she returned to her empty classroom. "It's just you and me, Daisy," she said. "I'm sure going to miss them this summer. But I can't wait for vacation." Isn't that fun? I bet a lot of teachers are hoping for a good summer, and they want you to have a good summer too. I know that, and I hope that you've had a great 5th grade year. I know you're excited about middle school. I know your 5th grade year didn't end quite how we thought it would, but I know that you're going to do great things when you move on up to 6th grade. Mrs. Hicks wanted us to remind you that the Mobile Public Library is doing curbside holds, so keep reading this summer. It's so important to keep growing your brain as you become a middle schooler. So you can go online, check out a book, and pick it up curbside from the Mobile Public Library. And that's all we have for 5th grade reading. Stay tuned. In just a few minutes, Miss Matani is going to bring you math. Have a great summer.